Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take a whole stack of sources, break them down, and give you the key takeaways fast.
Yep.
Today, we're diving into a sports story. It looks like just draft day stuff on the surface, maybe.
Yep.
But it really opens up a much bigger, older conversation.
He really does.
We're talking about the Cleveland Browns, rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders, and all these questions swirling around the NFL and, well, its relationship with black quarterbacks.
Right. And our mission here for this deep dive is to really sift through the evidence, look at the context, the different stories, which sometimes conflict, and try to answer a pretty important question. Is there a bias, maybe explicit, maybe more subtle, implicit, against winning with a black quarterback like Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland?
And look, this might sound like it's only about football, but believe us, what we find here goes way beyond the field.
Oh, definitely.
We're hitting on things like perception, bias, opportunity, stuff that applies almost anywhere talent gets judged. You might actually find some surprising things about how those intangibles get seen.
Leadership, grit, all that.
Exactly. Things you can't measure. And how that view can totally change depending on who's being looked at. So, yeah, let's unpack it.
Okay, absolutely. So the story really kicks off with Shedeur Sanders himself, obviously son of Deion Sanders, Hall of Famer.
Right.
And he came into the draft as a really high-profile black quarterback prospect. I mean, coming out of Colorado, he was a genuine star.
The stats were there.
Big time. Over 4,000 yards passing, 37 touchdowns. He led the Big 12, a major conference in both. There was serious talk about him being a first-round pick. Lots of analysts saw him as top-tier talent.
Okay, so you've got this impressive college career, all this pre-draft hype, but then his stock just, well, it fell. Pretty dramatically and kind of confusingly.
Yeah, it did. And how he actually landed in Cleveland is really the core of the puzzle here.
Because people thought first, maybe second round?
At least. But the Browns, they traded up to get him, but way down in the fifth round. Pick 144.
And here's the really strange part, the detail that made everyone go, huh. They did this after they'd already picked another quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, back in the third round.
Exactly. That move just instantly set off alarm bells, raised all sorts of questions about what the Browns were actually planning.
Did the sources give us any clues about the internal reaction? What was the feeling inside the building?
Well, yeah, they did offer some pretty revealing bits. For instance, when the owner, Jimmy Haslam, was asked about picking Sanders, he pretty much washed his hands of it, said, "It wasn't my call."
Wow.
Yeah, pointed the finger straight at the GM, Andrew Berry. Haslam even apparently said something like, "If you'd told me Friday night we were taking Shedeur, I'd have said no way."
It's pretty blunt.
It is. And then you look at the footage from the draft room, the war room feeds. Barry and the head coach, Kevin Stefanski, they didn't exactly look thrilled when Sanders' name got announced. Kind of unenthusiastic.
Okay, so you see this lack of visible excitement. Does that point to some kind of deliberate, maybe weird strategy? Or just genuine surprise? And how did that play out later, once Sanders was actually part of the team?
Well, it wasn't just a one-off draft room moment. That sort of lukewarm reception seemed to carry over into how they actually set up the quarterback situation.
How so?
The Browns basically overloaded the QB room. They didn't just have Gabriel and Sanders, the two rookies. They also brought in two veterans, Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett.
4 quarterbacks in camp.
4 quarterbacks, which, pretty much guarantees that Sanders is going to get minimal chances to really show what he can do right away. Flacco's basically pegged as the starter, Pickett the backup.
So Gabriel and Sanders are just fighting for scraps. Third string reps, maybe?
At best, yeah. That seems to be the setup.
Okay, but we need to be careful here. Saying the Browns or the NFL explicitly don't want to win with a black quarterback.
Yeah.
That's a massive accusation. Explicit racism is really, really hard to prove definitively.
Absolutely. And some prominent writers, insiders, they've flat out denied race as the main driver here. They'll point to things like Sanders' game film, maybe his personality, interviews.
So what do our sources say about those arguments? The counterpoints.
Well, if you zoom out and connect this to the bigger picture, there's a pretty compelling argument being made. Not necessarily about, conscious, explicit racism, but about how these subtle biases and old narratives, stereotypes, can shape how organizations like the Browns see things and act.
Okay.
Experts we looked at point out that a lot of the media coverage around Sanders used what they call coded language.
Coded language? Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so sources showed that media folks, team insiders too, kept describing Sanders as arrogant, Not confident, but arrogant.
Oh.
And a lot of research shows that distinction often falls along racial lines when people talk about black athletes versus white athletes. Confidence becomes arrogance.
Interesting. Anything else?
Yeah, and then there's the whole Deion Sanders factor, his dad. Some insiders were hinting that the circus, that's the word they used, around Deion being so outspoken and advocating for his son actually hurt Shedeur.
Which sounds like.
It echoes this, like, long-standing unease in sports with black figures who are very visible and vocal. It's quite telling, you know?
It does raise a question when you look back historically. I mean, the Browns themselves, not that long ago, they invested really high picks in white quarterbacks like Johnny Manziel, Baker Mayfield.
Right.
Both of whom definitely had concerns around personality, off-field stuff, right?
Right.
But the team seemed okay with that then. They framed it as being alpha or fiery competitors.
Yeah. They were willing to look past it or spin it positively.
So what does that comparison suggest about Sanders' situation now?
It suggests, based on what the sources indicate, that Sanders wasn't really given that same kind of leeway, that benefit of the doubt. So while, yeah, some NFL analysts strongly push back against the idea of organizational racism, you also have sociologists, race scholars, who argue that even subtle, maybe unconscious bias can still have a huge impact on outcomes, especially when you get into those fuzzy areas like intangibles and leadership.
It's about which traits get valued
Yeah.
and which get tolerated depending on who the player is.
Exactly. What's seen as a positive in one player might be a negative in another.
Okay, so let's track the Browns' decision-making after the draft itself. Sanders had the higher college profile, maybe better projections than Gabriel.
Arguably, yes.
But Cleveland took Gabriel first.
Mm-hmm.
Then Sanders lands there too. What happened once they were actually, practicing together?
Well, reports started coming out that Sanders wasn't getting any first-team reps. Not in minicamp, not in training camp.
None.
Seems like it. He was basically stuck at the bottom of the depth chart. And this was even when some reports suggested he was actually performing better than others in, like, the spring practices.
So potential may be showing, but limited opportunity. Classic situation.
A very classic case, yeah.
And that 4-quarterback room we talked about, how did that feed into this whole dynamic?
Oh, it's absolutely a key part of the puzzle. The way the Browns built that roster, snacking it with 4 QBs, 2 vets, 2 rookies, it almost guarantees someone gets squeezed out.
And given Sanders' draft spot, the limited reps,
Mm-hmm.
he's the likely one.
It makes him the most vulnerable, yeah. Likely heading for the margins, maybe the practice squad, or even getting cut altogether.
Anything else that stood out from the sources about how he was treated or perceived?
Yeah, something quite telling was this repeated talk about needing humility from Sanders. You saw it from insiders, commentators.
Humility.
Yeah. And it's a word you don't often hear applied so specifically to other rookie quarterbacks, especially white ones. Academic research on NFL media coverage points this out consistently. It often seems like a racially coded expectation, an unspoken demand frequently directed at black QBs.
Interesting. Now, despite all this stuff swirling around the pressure, the perceptions, how has Shedeur Sanders himself handled it, according to the sources?
Publicly, he's actually shown a pretty remarkable mix of patience and professionalism.
Really?
Yeah, there is that story about him telling his dad, Deion, not to even visit training camp until he felt he'd earned the reps.
I remember that.
Right. He apparently said something like, I might only get 3 or 4 reps in practice. I don't want you seeing that. I'm not where I want to be yet. Let me get there first.
That shows some awareness, some poise.
Definitely. And he's handled the media well, been supportive of teammates, at least outwardly accepted this kind of underdog role he's been put in.
But the perception still lingers, right?
Yeah.
That he's facing a much tougher road than you'd expect for a rookie with his background.
Oh, absolutely. The perception persists that his path to getting real playing time is way steeper than it should be for someone with his profile, his talent, his pedigree.
And it goes beyond just reps, right?
Yeah, it includes things like minor off-field stuff, like speeding tickets, getting blown up and framed as signs of immaturity.
Whereas for other prospects.
Right. Similar, sometimes even worse things from other players. Often white quarterbacks get brushed off as just learning experiences or boys will be boys kind of thing.
So the standard seems different.
It appears that way. He's been basically written off by some national analysts as the last option at quarterback for the Browns, even before we've really seen much preseason action. It's a stark difference in how character seems to be judged.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. Let's bring it back to that main question we started with. Are the Browns deliberately reluctant to win with a black quarterback? Or is it something more nuanced, maybe?
Based on this deep dive, looking across all the sources, the evidence doesn't really scream open, explicit racism as the main driver behind every single decision the Browns made.
Okay.
But it does strongly suggest that these more subtle, maybe pervasive racial biases that have influenced QB evaluations in the NFL for a long, long time, seem to be very much tangled up in Shedeur Sanders' specific case.
So less about conscious malice.
And maybe more about these deeply ingrained patterns of thinking, of evaluating habitual biases.
How do these biases actually show up? Like, what does it look like on a practical level?
Well, the sources highlight a few key ways they tend to manifest. One is sort of a reluctance to fully commit to, prioritize, or really develop a high-profile black quarterback as the guy, the franchise cornerstone, even when the talent seems to be there.
Okay. What else?
Then there's that expectation of reserved humility we talked about, where if a black quarterback shows visible self-confidence, it gets labeled negatively, punished almost.
Well, the same trait in white QBs gets praised.
Exactly. It gets spun as competitiveness or leadership. And finally, there's structuring competition, like that 4 QB room-in ways that can systematically put certain players at a disadvantage, regardless of their actual potential on paper.
Right. So the implication for the Browns then, given their actions taking 2 rookies, seemingly not giving Sanders developmental chances that match his talent level, though lack of strong public backing.
It makes it look exceptionally unlikely, frankly, that they will win with a black quarterback in the near future, at least not under this current leadership setup and approach. The conditions just don't seem to be there for someone like Sanders to thrive.
Which brings us to the final thought. Maybe the most provocative thing to consider here is that Sanders' situation. It's probably not just some isolated weird incident.
No, if it's a pattern.
Right. It feels like maybe the latest chapter in this longer story about how black quarterbacks are scouted, talked about, especially that intangibles conversation, and how much developmental support they actually get across the league. So the question to leave you, the listener, with is, what does this ongoing pattern really tell us about how unconscious biases can quietly shape who gets opportunities, who succeeds, not just in the NFL, but really in any field where talent is supposed to be the main thing? What's the real legacy of these patterns for diversity and opportunity moving forward? Something to think about.